From Informa Tech Target, I'm David Essex, and this is Enterprise Apps Unpacked. At the beginning of my career covering IT, I was inspired by the vision of Pat McGovern, the late founder of the publisher IDG, who predicted that technology would break down barriers between people and countries to form a global community. It was idealistic and we now know overly optimistic. Computers and communication technology have brought people together, but they've also made it easier to divide into hostile tribes. Al-Qaeda uses the internet for recruitment. Governments attack each other's networks and spread disinformation to interfere in elections. And cybercriminals steal money and identities. It turns out this undeniably world-changing, epoch-making technology is just another tool that can be used for ill as much as good, depending on the ethics of the person using it. One common misuse is fraud, which is defined as deception for financial or personal gain. I'm speculating, but it's reasonable to assume fraud has existed as long as language. It's also a major category of crime recognized in legal systems along with theft. Today's guest, Brian Sommer, has been researching and writing about fraud and talent management, especially how AI has transformed it, the same way AI has transformed a lot of things, by enabling job seekers, employees, and contractors to commit more fraud faster and sometimes in new ways. He's a respected analyst and consultant and frequent writer and speaker on ERP, especially HR and finance technology. He was a partner at Accenture for 18 years and launched a dot-com startup before founding his analyst firm TechVentive in 2003. We're familiar with applicants who lie on resumes about their education and jobs, or people who only pretend to be working. That kind of fraud doesn't require information technology but is often enabled by it. Now AI makes possible new kinds of fraud that would normally be too time-consuming, like rewriting dozens of resumes and cover letters to match job descriptions, or anticipating interview questions to appear more knowledgeable. In the podcast, Brian provides an extensive catalog of the different types of HR-related fraud. We also discuss how technology vendors are trying to deal with fraud and what organizations can do to spot fraud and minimize its impact. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Enterprise Apps Unpacked for the real story on the software that runs your business. Brian, I think this is the first time we've had you on the new podcast, so I'm really happy to have you here today. Thanks for coming on.
Happy to be here. And it's actually kind of nice, David, to see you for a change and not have to fly somewhere like 1,500 miles away to Vegas or something or bump into you there.
Absolutely. Anyway. I'm really excited about this topic. You've been looking into fraud involving job seekers, employees, and contractors, and it's impacting organizations. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the kinds of fraud that you're seeing. I think it's a pretty long list, actually.
It is, and there's a bunch of different ways that it pops up. What you and your audience don't know about me is I do a lot of expert witness work, and I've taken tons of law courses in my college background. And I remember, I don't know how many eons ago, learning that fraud is defined as the intent to deceive. And when people are doing things like making up stuff on their resume or their job application, they are intending to deceive. That's fraud. Anyway, here are some of the categories. There's situations where if somebody lies on a resume, if they don't complete their college education, or maybe they never even went to that school, but say that they did, that is just flat out a misrepresentation. That is, they're misrepresenting who they are, and that's a type of fraud. If they accept pay to do certain tasks, but they don't deliver the required work products, then that is called time theft, and it's actually not kosher from the law perspective. And I think we've all probably met someone who at some point in time is collecting a paycheck, but just will not or does not do the work. And that can be very problematic and expensive for employers. You have employees who pretend to be working on a given task, but are actually doing something completely different. And that's a deception. Uh, Straight out. And or some people call it performance theater, some people call it productivity theater. I'll talk a little bit more about that maybe later in the podcast. But the whole idea is if I look busy, they won't assign work to me, and it causes downstream problems for everybody else and having to cover for the lack of abilities of someone else. Or you have a situation where you have someone else take certification exams and what have you on your behalf. And so what happens there is you're representing that you know some things, but you actually don't. And there's been a spate of these kind of issues popping up in the news lately, particularly with accounting firms and accountants. You have a couple more. There's one where you get paid to take training, but you didn't complete it. And in fact, maybe you didn't even take the training at all, but you said you did. And that's another type of time theft. And the last one is when you accept a full-time position with your firm, then you also accept a full-time position with one or more other firms. So you can't do all that work simultaneously. So what you're doing is, again, you're stealing time and not providing the value to employers. So we have a lot of that, and it's all being helped along lately because of not just AI, but all kinds of other time-shifting technologies that are available to job seekers and job holders out there. If you want, we can go through some more of that.
Yeah, I'd love
Anyway.
to. I understand that as AI is amplifying it, and you mentioned that it's not just AI. Can you kind of drill down a little bit into how the technology is making this worse?
Well, I don't think this will be a surprise to people listening in, but believe it or not, you can use citizen AI tools to actually tart up or perfect your resume. So we know that exists out there, and AI tools are, particularly generative AI tools, are really good at helping people, make their resume read just like the job description. But there are other tools that make you look like you're working, but you really aren't. There's this thing called a mouse jiggler. It's a digital tool that an employee can put on their laptop, and it's constantly moving your mouse around on the screen. So if your employer wants to have a piece of software running on the company issued laptop to see, are you actually doing work? It's faking out that technology by making it look like, oh, there is somebody there moving the mouse around. So they must be working on this problem. There are tools that help fool ATS, applicant tracking system software. There are tools that are good at helping someone fake their way through a video interview. AI tools can actually be used to go canvas the internet for you and find out what are the common interview questions at your firm, like TechTarget. What do they use on job interviews? And they'll even suggest the potential answers you ought to use. Now, we can all have a robust debate about is that ethical or not? But the reality is, if you wouldn't have known those answers anyway, then you probably are trending way over on the unethical side of behavior. There are tools, and I could go on. I mean, tools that help you pass exams and everything else, because they're basically giving you answers. And people need to realize that the game oftentimes for employers is they don't want people who have perfect exam scores. They want people they can trust and rely on, that those people know what they're doing. Because when they have unqualified, ill-prepared, whatever people do in some jobs, people can get hurt or killed if you're not careful. So we need to be aware that. I know someone's going to go like, Brian, that'll never happen with an accountant, but who
Right.
knows? They'll bust the lead off their number 2 pencil. Anyway, go ahead.
So, what is this all leading to? How bad do you think it can get?
The worst case occurs when you have some rogue nation states. North Korea gets mentioned a lot in this context, who have come up with some very elaborate ways of getting people jobs in sensitive companies or governmental entities. What they're doing is they're using AI tools to like project a different visage of you on the screen. And the AI tool is blinking your eyes and opening and closing your mouth to time with the verbal answers they're giving. They have AI tools that are in real time translating the question an interviewer is asking somebody and putting that in Korean, for example, and then feeding back an answer in English that it translated out. They're doing all this for some very interesting reasons. One is if they can get a North Korean individual employed by a company in the States, then they can collect a hard currency that they wouldn't otherwise get. And they have to rely on Confederates here in this country to help pick up checks or open bank accounts, whatever, and they then funnel that money back to North Korea. The other thing they're doing is by getting an inside access, appearing as a remote employee of some company, they now have the ability to plant spyware, download intellectual property, commit all kinds of IP thefts, and so forth. And it's a dangerous deal. I am surprised how many HR people I talk to have been burned by these either organized crime backed or Rogue Nation backed job seekers. And they usually don't find out about it until after the person's been in their employ for a while. Anyway, that's how organized, structured, and powerful this kind of activity can be, particularly when it's being used by a much larger entity to inflict some rather wide-scale kind of fraud and change onto another organization.
I understand there's a related problem where potentially productive workers actually don't deliver because they're using, or maybe a better word is abusing AI. Can you talk about that aspect a bit?
So let's set up this scenario. About 4 years ago, I started talking to audiences about how people are going to use citizen AI tools. And I'm asking these HR crowds, have you got countermeasures in place to deal with this? And the answer is usually, has been traditionally, no, they really don't. I mean, they'll talk about it from time to time, but they don't have any great methods in place, which is troubling to say the least. But what's happening is if everyone has the ability to access generative AI tools at little or no cost and can tailor their resume or whatever for every potential job out there, it makes everyone, including mediocre or very poor job seekers, rank so much higher on like an applicant tracking system. And it also makes the really good people, the delta, if you will, between them and the poorer skilled people gets much closer together. And it also makes it easier for people to just fabricate stuff, thinking they're not going to get caught. So what you end up with was something that it's the power of the large language models in these AI tools that is creating this, if you will, equilibrium across all kinds of job seekers when there shouldn't be one at all. If you're a recruiter, you want the ability to segregate out and find out who are my top potential or potential high-performing people versus ones who are way down at the bottom. You want to be able to break that out. And so there was a great study that just came out in the last 8 or 10 weeks or so. And what these folks theorized was what I'd been talking about for years, which is once people have access at a citizen AI level to these tools, it levels out the whole playing field and makes the differentiation difficult. And they went by using data from, I want to say, it was one of the giant job boards. And as they looked through it, they compared how well people could discriminate between two job seekers in the pre-large language model AI, generative AI kind of era to today. And what they concluded was that employers now are hiring, I'm going to get the numbers right here, they're hiring 19% less often the people that are in the top quintile of capabilities, and they're hiring 14% more often the people who are in the bottom quintile. So this citizen AI tool is just creating a horrible job market where companies are inadvertently hiring some of the worst candidates in larger numbers, and the best ones aren't even getting a phone call. And that's kind of the consequences of it. And this was in a great academic study. If somebody wants to know more about it, you or I, we could certainly
Yeah.
flip them a link over to that
Yeah, I was just gonna
piece.
say, I'll put one on the landing page, for this podcast. Yeah, I'm anxious to read the whole thing. It sounds like, because you mentioned citizen AI a few times, and we used to talk not too many years ago about the citizen programmer. So now we have citizen AI. Anyone can get it. But this is a really dark side of it, where almost anyone can use pretty powerful tools in ways that are actually hurting employers. So does this say anything about citizen AI? Does it say maybe something about how we ought to control access to these things?
Uh, there is an old IT law called Fubini's Law. It's hard to find it on the internet, but dig around. I know I've quoted it a couple times in some articles or books. And it basically says that when a new technology comes out, people use it to do what they used to do, just more efficiently. That's the first. Okay. Once that happens, then people start to look at the new technology in a way where they could apply it in completely different kind of manners. And that creates new kind of directions on where that technology is going to go. Then as it's being used in these all new ways and all new places, it creates even more kind of, it triggers more innovation where people are going to now use it to do things no one ever imagined. And then that creates a whole new innovation cycle, and the cycle repeats itself over and over again. And because once it triggers a whole new innovation, then people get that and go, oh, I won't do this one thing the way I used to. Now I'll use this new innovation to knock it out. So what's happening here is the citizen AI stuff is really just a manifestation of Fubini's law, where the new stuff the new AI tools are coming out, and people are starting to use them. And you go to a lot of the same tech events that I do, David. What do we see a lot of the vendors talking about with AI right now is, well, I'm going to add a little bit of agentic glue between these two processes here. I'm going to use a little generative AI tool to, I don't know, generate job descriptions in the HR module, and I'll use a little bit of some algorithmic stuff in a financial planning module. And they're doing very incremental things. They're using the stuff to just barely stretch the old applications. And then all of a sudden someone's going to come out with, oh yeah, but I used one or two of these in combination and I completely built something new and different. And that's kind of where we're at right now. And these citizen AI tools just reflect how everyday people see this stuff and go, yeah, instead of just having it tweak my resume to match the job description, why don't I ask it to give me generate a resume for me of someone who's likely to win an interview, and they start pushing it in all new areas.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that's what we have.
So we've talked about the ways that people without the best intentions are using this technology in all sorts of bad ways in basically the recruiting process. So there are other sort of follow-on impacts maybe on business or society that you're seeing and how this is playing out in other areas?
Couple things. There's an acronym that I kind of think more people will be using. It's called a PURE. And a PURE is a previously undetected recruiting error. And you probably have some in your company right now, and some folks who slipped through the recruiting traps and cracks and processes. And it's going to get possibly worse going forward, because when you have pretenders getting into these job roles, it's a very expensive process to find them and get them out. There is something that's going on, and that's this productivity theater, and that's this whole deal where people are kind of trying to look busy or whatever. And the knock-on effects are really interesting, and the lack of traps to find out if this is going on in a company are incredibly apparent. I'm working with someone on a new manuscript on a book where we're looking at empathetic leaders and so forth. And one of the problems we keep running into is there are all these things you would have thought systematically companies would look at. For example, let's say TechTarget makes an acquisition, but it doesn't. But instead of kind of making sure everyone's workload is balanced, even, fair, proportionate, that they tend to keep overloading some of the hardest working people with the bulk of the work, and then others who are not as productive or whatever. Instead of dealing with them, they just let them get by with doing less work. So you end up with these imbalances, and some people in some companies figure out like, I don't know why I need to bust my hump to do all this work. I'll just kind of coast and look busy, but not do it. And they'll have to then assign it to the best and brightest who get burned out and leave. And what you end up with is like a demoralized, empty kind of workforce that just won't do any kind of work going forward. I don't want people to think that I'm strictly a negative guy, but and I'm not. I'm really not. I'm very optimistic. That's why I'm like working on this book on an empathetic leader. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I don't think through multiple like chess moves on how are the different parties involved in these kind of processes going to be using or misusing things like AI to not always do the right thing. And that's what I think smart employers are always looking out for that.
So
Um,
what should companies do then to try to stay ahead of this?
uh, well, I'll give you something real simple. Why don't we know, for example, um, one of the biggest sins I see in management is companies have CFOs who think that just because they went through a big four apprenticeship is the way they would describe it as the early part of their career, and they had to work 1,000 hours of overtime in their first year of work. That then everyone who works for them ought to be worked to death as well. It's part of what they need to do. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that's a sign of poor management and a lack of not having enough staff or what have you. But we don't have things in systems to say, okay, David here walked into the office building at 6:05 a.m. this morning and stayed till 8 p.m. And they don't track that time, even though they probably have badge reading systems, everything else to know when you're doing work. And they know when you log onto your computer and how much time you can spend. They know all the acquired time that's being consumed for the company, and yet they pay you a salary. And at no point do they ever reconcile like, the year should be about 2,000 hours of work, 50 weeks of 40 hours a week. And yet David here has worked over 3,200 hours this year. And why is that? And maybe the reason is because you work for a sadist of a boss. I don't know who your boss is. I'm
Luckily,
just
this is not the case. But anyway, go ahead.
okay. But I'm making an illustrative point. But this is a chronic problem in like finance organizations and corporate finance where people are just getting worked to death. But because their salary, no one in HR knows how many hours these people are actually working, and no one cares. And, so we're missing a lot of the correct metrics to find out who are the most abusive bosses, whatever. And these AI tools exacerbate the problem because if we have a bunch of performance theater kind of stuff going on in a company, the question is, do you have a tool or metrics or whatever that's going to spot where this activity is going on? Because otherwise you're allowing a bad behavior to further impact morale and hurt the culture, hurt the employment brand, and trigger additional attrition of the best and brightest your company has. So that's not good. Now, to your point, what do the better companies do? They do things like, remember President Reagan decades ago, his big thing was trust but verify. And if we're going to be looking to hire people, whatever, I think you've got to acknowledge that what people put in a resume is self-reported data. And there is no guarantee it's going to be correct. I think I shared with you some stats on something like 73% of resumes prior to AI coming into the world had some measure of factual errors in them. I'm not going to call them lies, but let's call them factual errors or things you might misinterpret or whatever. And only maybe 7 to 9% of those or some low number like that ever get caught. And even if they get caught, there's like almost no employer puts any real consequences on the person who lied other than maybe terminate them. So we've got some real issues. If we weren't doing a good job of this kind of stuff with detecting the fraud in the past, with AI, it just makes it that much more prevalent and makes the makes one conclude that we have trouble here in River City with recruiting and talent acquisition. It begins with a T for talent and whatever ends with A, and we gotta get working on it.
I was going to say, how
Go ahead.
about tech solutions? You had a great piece you wrote for diginomica.com on what HireVue is up to. So I'm wondering about some of the tech vendors' solutions, sort of countermeasures, what they're doing and whether it's enough.
Okay, so I'm thrilled you read that one piece. There was one a few months earlier I'd done about what I didn't see at the HR Tech show in Vegas in earlier in the fall, and I kind of I went on a rant on that one about how I was looking for these countermeasures and I saw almost nothing. Since then, that must have got under the skin of a couple of the other vendors that were there, but only because there's like 500 exhibitors alone at that show. I can't see them all. So I heard back from a number of them, and HireVue clearly, focuses in on the problem of the self-reported data. That's one, and they believe that kind of in that trust but verify that any applicant you're thinking of going further into the interviewing process with needs to have a skills assessment done on them to see if they actually do have the abilities that they purport to have on the resume. I think that's a great idea. And the way they do it is because it's all digital and non-human based, they can do that at scale and they can test lots and lots of people for a given potential role. On the creative side, I saw one company that they'll pull up your history of social media profiles and they will compare things. And so, for example, if all of a sudden today I'm applying for the CEO position of some Fortune 500 firm, but they looked at my social profile for years and decades on like LinkedIn or whatever. I've never been beyond, let's say, a senior manager was as high as I ever got in my career. How can I apply for this CEO role? Something's wrong. And if all of a sudden my resume seems to suggest I actually have these credentials, they're going to flag it. So they're using a different kind of public information, still self-reported, to see if they catch you in a lie. That's one company. Another one looks at your historical payroll data. There are a lot of companies that capture this or buy this information from big payroll service bureaus, and they're looking to see the same kind of thing, like, wait a minute, this person had an hourly job working in a warehouse picking stock. How can they now be applying for a CEO position? Something's not right here. So they can look at past payroll data. They can use the payroll data to identify employment gaps potentially. And there's other kind of ways they can do it. And there was even a startup a few years back that tried to get the academic credentials of people and put that in a highly secured blockchain protected kind of database that employers could tap into to see instantly if someone had the educational credentials they claimed to have. So there's work going on. And in fact, an analyst who chided me a couple of years ago at a big analyst event with a major vendor, he just thought I was blowing this issue up out of proportion. He's had a complete 180 and a whole change of heart that, no, this really is a problem. And I thought his timing was interesting on this mea culpa because he was getting ready to launch a big, webinar or something with a vendor who's now got some countermeasures they're ready to launch into the market. So it's real. It's definitely there.
So we got a couple minutes left here. What is your parting advice? Do you have any more to add about how organizations especially should try to adapt and deal with this?
So I think the first thing is a word I love to use, cosmopolitan. I'm not pitching the magazine. I'm talking about a kind of a work ethic or ethos that a company should have. You need to be very aware of what's going on around you. And if you haven't let your recruiting and talent acquisition people out of the office in the last couple of years to go kick tires at a big show or something, you need to be very, very aware of what's going on. You need to run focus groups with potential like job seekers and Ask them questions about what is or isn't challenging, if you will, from a recruiting perspective. What are they frustrated with? What do they like? And that'll give you earfuls on how they're using AI for good or bad. And you need to look into that. I think some people need to do some A/B testing. If your ATSs are ranking candidates, you might want to pull, let's say, 200 resumes and run them through your ATS as well as run them through manually with your recruiting staff and see how close they're matching up now, because your ATS may not be doing a good enough job of filtering out the frauds, and there are a lot of them. I would recommend companies even do brown bag webinars, whatever, where you invite a number of different vendors to present different, like every Thursday, you got another vendor that's going to present to your HR team to show you what they're doing as far as releasing new kinds of countermeasures and what could be helpful in changing things. But more than anything else, folks, you got to realize the recruiting and talent acquisition process is fundamentally broken. And it's been broken by AI. And slapping more AI on top of a broken process is probably not going to give you a great result. What you need is to rethink the process and get clear about what is our real goal here. What is it, our objective that we want? We want to hire great quality people, and we have to think about how do we find them, how do we cultivate them and move them through a process, and how do we eliminate the ones that are going to be a serious time sink and a waste of time and money for our firm. Anyway.
So it's people, process, and technology, which is often what this comes down to.
Oh, good. You would have to say that.
Right.
No, but that's true. I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to run away from that. I will give you, if you got 1 second, I still think I collect all these stories of these incredible fraud things or whatever. There was one guy, his wasn't so much a fraud, but he used AI to apply to 5,000 jobs, 5,000. And this kind of stuff fills up the inboxes of HR departments all over the world. I asked an audience of about 1,100 HR executives, I go, without telling them what I'm going to talk about, I just go, how many of you noticed a real big influx in the number of applications you're receiving? All these hands went up, probably 92, 95% of the hands in the room shot up, and they're all kind of looking at each other, and you could see they were sad. It was a sad look because they realized, like, oh, I thought it was because we had a great employment brand, but it turns out this is some broad phenomenon going over the market. And so we have that. We have this one, the problem is they're loading up, they're spamming employers is basically what they're doing. They're spamming the talent acquisition deal. We didn't talk about that really on this call, but this is another part of the problem is AI just makes it so easy for so many people to apply to so many positions, many of which they're not really going to be that serious of a candidate or may be that qualified to tackle, but they do it anyway. So back to my key point, the process is fundamentally broken.
Well, Brian, it's been great talking to you. You've given me a lot of ideas. The nefarious ones I won't use. I'm near the tail end of my career, so not looking for another job. But I think if HR people and C-level people listen to this, you've given them a lot to chew on, so to speak. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, David, and happy holidays.
Yeah, same to you. Thank you for listening to Enterprise Apps Unpacked, where we give the real story on the software that runs your business. To learn more about business applications, explore our content on searcherp.com. Find us on YouTube at our channel, Eye on Tech. Subscribe to our podcast to receive the latest episodes as they drop. And if you liked what you heard today, give us a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Until next time.
Podcast programming and promotion by Kelsey Waddell. Music supplied by DP via Getty Images. This is an Informa Tech Target production.